We'll probably go into like the W3C stuff, or the technical stuff in more detail. But one thing I was curious about is the W3C seems like a very technical place for a designer to be. And in terms of just like the design visual language is very specific, and if you have an art background, people can sometimes relate to it, or they something they learn over time. How do you feel like working in that environment where you're trying to articulate the importance of typography, and sometimes it's hard to quantify that with metrics and data, but it's like instinctively um,
Right.
how do you manage that?
Um, well, I'll answer that, but I think the first thing that I want to say is the W3C is a group of people that, by and large, there's a massive number of them that really care about text. I mean, there's like if you've spent any time at all, and you work on a browser, so I'm sure that you have, reading CSS specifications, the level of thought and detail and care that went into defining the specs around hyphenation is
Yeah,
staggering. I mean, and so there it's like there's these pockets of it that are amazing, and whether or not all of it's been implemented is a totally different question. Um, but I have found that there is more and more recently. Tristan really has a lot to say about this. Um, there's been an interest in engaging more with the type community, which has been awesome. That's actually where I kind of first became connected with the web font working group. Um, was in 2018. They held well, the CSS working group held a meeting at Typo Labs in Berlin, and I was invited along with a few other people from the web design and web development and type worlds to kind of come in and sit in on a meeting, and we're talking about a lot of things related to variable fonts and other aspects of implementation of typography.
yeah,
And um, so I think there actually is a great interest in those working groups in having more experts from these adjacent areas engaged, so that we get naming right, that we get um, details right about what we need on the web as practitioners. And so that whole shift of the W3C over to GitHub, that was huge. So that really made the ability to participate much easier.
mm,
And so you can link people to an issue and say, here's where the discussion's happening. And so I try and do that and really follow the lead of folks like Jen Simmons and Rachel Andrew and others to to get more people into that conversation. And so I I've had very good luck in the reception of the ideas that I have as a designer, as a technologist, or in trying to fit into that conversation. What I've had to do is understand the depth to which they need something considered and defined before it could be made part of the CSS specification. Because that's, as we have our own use case in mind with something, and we want to focus in on that, and we can describe that particular use case, and then they come back with 47 other ways that this would be implemented on the web in different languages and directions
yeah,
and writing modes and stuff. And and for something to be fully baked, you've got to consider all those things. So as a designer, you really have to think about it from a system perspective, which is a good exercise as a designer, but it is definitely something that sort of goes beyond what many of us, I think, would naturally be inclined to do. Is we solve the problem at hand, and maybe it's a problem at hand in the context of a design system or something, but this goes way beyond that. It's the design system, the browser implementation, what do the fonts support, what does the language support, and how does that differ. So there's so many different issues there. um, Even just getting better link underlining,
yeah,
well, that's really cool, except some languages use overlining. I'm
yeah,
like, oh, I didn't know that.
yeah. Of
So,
course.
like defining that offset has to go in more than one direction, and so like there's interesting nuances to it like that that um, I think really fit into our world as designers in challenging our own assumptions and biases and what we know of the world. So again, like even something like a link underline, you then have your brain sort of expanded, like, okay, well, that's one set of scripts. What about Devanagari? What about Chinese, Japanese, Korean,
Yeah.
Arabic? How do those languages behave? How do those scripts behave? And what's good and what's normal there? I love it. I mean, I just there's
Yeah.
so you can go so deep into any one of those little wells.
Jason, do you mind taking a step back for a second? So we have some designers that follow Design Huddle that are not like web designers. So can you just give
Sure.
an overview of W3C? And I'd also love to hear about like how you got selected. I feel like that's like a great honor. Like a lot of designers would love to have that kind of like responsibility, I think is like a good word for it. So I'd love to just hear like an overview for anyone that doesn't know, and then another step of just like how did you progress into that, and like how can people get more involved,
Sure.
in the W3C?
Yeah. Oh, I that's perfect. I would love to answer that. So, the W3C is the body that is responsible for the standardization of HTML, CSS, even JavaScript. So, like any of these web specifications that are what we all count on as web designers and web developers to build the web, all of that stuff is housed by the W3C. And so that's the standards body that defines what is an HTML tag and how does it behave? What is a CSS selector and how does it behave? And then, the job of the W3C is to define those things really thoroughly in a way that covers all of the ambiguity and all the different use cases. And then that is the basis by which browser teams then look at that specification and decide how they want to implement it. And so it is literally what is the building blocks. That's our material of the web, at lowercase m. So I don't want to confuse that with anything at Google, but this is the stuff of which the web is made. The analogy for designers who are graphic designers and are coming from more traditional forms of media, it is your paper, it's your ink, it's your varnish, it's your die cuts, it's all of those things that graphic designers grow up learning and knowing about the producing of a physical thing. This is the analogy of the web. So, not to stir up that pot of designers and code, but that is it. That is literally like understanding what those things are and how they behave is that a fundamental part of designing for the web.
Yeah, that's super
And
clear.
yeah,